In the heart of West Africa, where sand moves faster than governments can act, one headline just rewrote the rules. Burkina Faso will unleash 1.2 million rabbits into one of the harshest deserts on Earth. Not onto farms, not into cages, straight into the open, against the wind, the heat, and the drought. Most nations would send machines. Most leaders would wait for loans. But Ibrahim Traoré calls this not a gamble, but a campaign. A fight where every grain of sand is enemy territory. And here's the twist. The West sees small animals. Burkina Faso sees an army. An army designed by nature to dig, to fertilize, to turn dead soil into living earth. The question is, will this be the boldest environmental turnaround in modern Africa, or the fastest failure ever recorded? Before we break it down, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And what would your country do if the desert started taking your hometown? Would you bring steel or millions of small, tireless creatures? You're watching Africa Daily Good News, where stories aren't just headlines, they're a daily pulse of survival, dignity, and the will to change. For those joining us from the US, across Africa, or anywhere the fight for land still matters, welcome. And in Burkina Faso, this fight began, with one press conference, one number, and a room full of people who couldn't believe what they just heard. A president orders animals into open desert. Not a few hundred, 1.2 million. In Ouagadougou, microphones crowd a podium as Ibrahim Traoré confirms a national restoration push that will deploy rabbits directly into degraded Sahel land. Officials frame it as a 5-year drive targeting roughly 100,000 hectares that today are mostly bare and blowing. International headlines flare, some call it theatrical, others impossible. But the government's language is clinical. Land, water, infiltration, cost, control. The shock isn't the creature, it's the use case. Here's the immediate context, clean and simple. The Sahel is losing arable ground fast. Food and water insecurity push families towards cities. Wells drop, topsoil breaks. Conventional fix, heavy machinery, deep ripping, imported parts, fuel, maintenance, an expensive chain a low-budget state can't reliably feed. The countermove? Biology at scale. Millions of burrowers that fracture hardpan, route rainfall downward, and return nutrients with every pellet. It sounds strange until you run the math. Then the stunt starts reading like logistics. Choose A, steel, high speed, high spend, high dependency. Choose B, fur, slower per unit, but millions of units, local labor, and projected savings redirected into reservoirs, windbreaks, and paid protection zones. Gain: water held longer, soils breathing again, jobs anchored at home. Risk: population control, crop protection, predation balance. The trade is real on both sides. People react first with instinct. Most Americans, when asked in surveys about disaster fixes, default to bring bigger machines, fast, visible, reassuring. Yet restoration researchers often note the opposite bias in the field. Living systems repair living systems best when given protection and time. That clash, modern reflex versus ecological patience, sits at the heart of this plan. If you've watched drought reshape your town, what would your community choose? Loud certainty now, or quieter work that scales with each sunrise? On the ground, it isn't theory, it's routine life trying to return. A shopkeeper who once stocked trucked in water eyes a map of new reservoir sites. A teacher marks attendance and wonders if a green belt could hold families together through the next dry season. Before versus after is the human measure here. Fear to participation. Waiting for outsiders to doing it with our own hands. The twist is not technical, it's about control over fate. Cameras lower, the room settles, a satellite image of the Sahel glows on a screen. The lens moves from the podium to the land itself, where the argument will have to prove itself in soil, not sound bites. A country that can't afford bulldozers draws a battle plan anyway. The shocking line isn't rabbits in the desert, it's 5 years to flip dead ground back to life. Officials outline a phased push. Priority zones across severely degraded belts, reservoirs dug and linked to catch short rains, Windbreak trees planted in rows to slow sand protected work areas where burrowers can operate without being wiped out by predators. Targets are blunt. Restore roughly 100,000 hectares, lift today's thin strip of green toward majority cover, stabilize wells that drop every dry season. The part critics miss. This is logistics, not vibes. Numbers drive the frame. Money freed by avoiding heavy machinery is earmarked for water storage, nursery stock, fencing, local payrolls, and training crews to manage population density. Release windows are timed near rain so tunnels don't bake shut. Guard teams patrol perimeters. Cropping plots sit outside active burrow zones until soils are ready. Trade-offs are spelled out. Choose speed with steel. Depend on imported parts and fuel. Choose scale with biology. Accept slower optics but compounding output as numbers work day and night. What looks small per animal becomes enormous at 1 million plus. And if you're watching from the US, you've seen this logic before. Cities restore wetlands not with concrete alone, but with plants and beavers that move more water than a budget ever could. People measure plans in before and after, not spreadsheets. Before, mothers queuing for trucked water, us, teachers watching attendance collapse as families leave. After, if it holds, paid crews in high-vis vests, saplings in wind shadows, a shallow reservoir that doesn't vanish by mid-season, kids walking to class because their parents stayed. The human twist. The policy isn't just green, it's glue, tying people back to land through work they can own. And if human nature leans toward the visible, Americans often prefer fixes that hum and flash. Restoration science keeps pointing to dull, steady routines that win over time. Here's the question without the lecture. If your town had to pick, would you chase the fast headline or the slow habit that keeps paying back next year? Comment with where you're watching from and one fix your city. Tried that actually worked. If you want quiet, checkpoint-style updates as this unfolds, subscribe to Africa Daily. Good news. No noise, just progress or failure measured cleanly. The cameras pull back from the map on the wall. The lens drops from tree rows and reservoir contours to the ground itself, hard pan that either opens to water or stays shut. The next step isn't political language. It's what happens underneath the surface. Hard pan shouldn't breathe, yet that's the point, make it breathe. The drill bit here isn't steel, it's a claw. Technical briefings call rabbits ecosystem engineers for a reason. Burrows fracture compacted layers, open pore space, move oxygen, and build capillaries for water to sink instead of sprinting off the surface. Near active tunnel networks, field teams expect infiltration to jump. Roots reach deeper, microbial life wakes up. Droppings aren't waste, they're payload. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, delivered underground where seedlings can actually use them. What looks like chaos on the surface is ordered plumbing below. Implementation is mechanical in its own way. Release windows hug the first storms, so fresh tunnels don't kiln into concrete. Predator buffers are designed with shrub lines and brush piles, not to erase predation but to slow it, buying time for networks to form. Density is capped per hectare. If numbers overshoot, you thin or relocate. Better a moving workforce than a permanent pressure on crops. Agronomy crews mark no-go rings around planting plots until soils are loose enough to handle roots without collapse. Choose A and fence everything tight. You get protection, but you also lock water flow and wildlife corridors. Choose B and gate it. Movement stays possible, and the land begins to stitch itself back together. Comparisons are not theory, they're precedent. U.S. grasslands recover faster around prairie dog towns. Their mounds alter water paths and seed catch. Southern Africa documents burrowers punching micro wells that cradle seedlings through dry spells. High latitudes lean on beavers to build wetlands cheaper than any line item. The pattern repeats across continents. Small engineers change hydrology first, vegetation second, livelihoods last. Skeptics point to crop damage and disease risk. The plan answers with phased zones, vaccination protocols where needed, and a clear exit. Once a block's soil function returns, you taper the workforce and shift it to the next scar on the map. The human read is simpler. A technician kneels by a test plot after the first rain. The water doesn't sheet away, it sinks. A farmer presses a heel into earth that used to ring like brick. It gives. Before, the land took and took. After, even in pilot strips, it starts to give back. Most Americans, by habit, trust what makes noise and sparks. Fieldwork teaches another reflex. If life can do the job, let life do the job, then guard it like infrastructure. The quiet twist is that biology scales while budgets shrink. Every sunrise adds labor you didn't have to hire. No one's romanticizing an easy win. Overbrowse can happen. Predators can key in. Wet years can turn dry mid-season and strand young litters. The scorecard tracks trade-offs, not miracles. Water held longer versus potential fence repairs. Root depth gained versus occasional crop shielding. Organic matter rising versus time to manage numbers. On good weeks, the map shows blue dots, new infiltration readings, and green halos where saplings didn't crisp out. On bad weeks, you see red flags, burrow breaches near storage berms, predation spikes, so you adjust. That is restoration in practice. Measure, nudge, measure again. The camera drops from diagrams to the soil line, where claws meet clay and the first chambers open. Sound fades to a low thud of distant thunder, the kind that decides whether this plan becomes data or just another headline that never reached the ground. Budgets don't stop desserts, decisions do. The most controversial line item here is the one they didn't buy. Instead of a fleet of deep rippers and earth movers with imported parts, Burkina Faso pencils out a biological workforce and redirects capital into water storage, tree nurseries, fencing, and local payrolls. Internal briefs separate costs into two stacks. What heavy mechanization would demand up front, fuel, maintenance, spare parts, transport, and what a biology-first push can avoid, projecting savings on the order of nearly the whole capex. Those funds are pre-assigned to reservoirs tied to short rainy windows, windbreak rows to keep sand down, and paid teams to manage densities, relocate animals when zones hit soil targets, and guard seedling belts. Cheap does not mean easy. It means the money moves to where time is the real currency. The structure is phased so optics don't outrun physics. Release windows sit just ahead of rains. Burrow zones are buffered from crops. Agronomy crews set thresholds. When infiltration and root depth cross a line, a block graduates and labor shifts to the next scar. Choose A, steel. You buy speed and spectacle, but you lease vulnerability to supply chains that can stall a whole season. Choose B, biology. You accept slower visuals per hectare, but you gain compounding effort as living systems work through nights and weekends. The loss column is honest. Fence repairs, occasional crop shielding, patrol costs, relocation logistics. The gain column is blunt. Water held longer, soils that don't crust, wells that stabilize, jobs that anchor families. The twist is arithmetic, not romance. The plan only looks risky if you price land like it can be replaced. Human beings don't argue in spreadsheets, they argue in kitchens. Before, a shopkeeper sells jerry cans because the well is down. A bus ticket out looks safer than one more planting season. After, if targets hold, a short-term stipend to guard a zone, a nursery receipt, a shift on the reservoir dig, and a reason to stay through the next dry spell. According to most behavior studies, people commit when payoff is near, visible, and theirs to touch. Americans, in particular, often favor visible machinery because it signals control. Here, visibility is different, a shallow basin still holding water in week 7, a field that doesn't blow into the road, a ledger that pays on Friday. Control arrives as habit, not hardware. There is a clock on the wall of this choice. Drought doesn't pause for procurement, and inflation turns every imported filter or hose into next month's problem. If you were signing the purchase order for a county on the edge of West Texas, would you tie the plan to a global parts list or to labor your town can train, feed, and schedule by hand? That quiet question haunts the economics more than any headline. A district map is stamped, dates marked in pencil, then in ink. Outside, wind rattles the nursery shade cloth, and the first tank ring throws a long shadow across an hardpan. The camera rides that shadow toward the tree line, where numbers end and lived stakes begin. The loudest change isn't underground, it's on payday. The plan only works if people are paid to stay. Briefings lay out roles that didn't exist a year ago. Zone wardens to patrol burrow areas, nursery crews raising windbreak saplings, water teams that maintain small reservoirs and silt traps, field techs logging infiltration, root depth, and well levels, relocation crews that move animals once a block hits soil targets. Contracts are short, renewed by performance, training is modular. Payouts are scheduled to bridge the dry season. Women's groups get nursery and seed bank slots. Youth teams take patrol shifts and data rounds. This isn't charity, it's payroll tied to outcomes. Governance is meant to be close to the ground. Village committees sign off on buffer lines. Agronomy staff set graduate thresholds for each block. Grievance channels handle fence damage and crop shielding claims. The twist that surprises outsiders. Jobs are the lever that locks ecology to behavior. When the check depends on keeping water in a basin and seedlings alive through week 7, the project stops being the government's idea and becomes the household's routine. Most Americans, if asked, prefer fixes that look like progress by Friday. Behavior research says people stick when the payoff is near, visible, and theirs to touch. This design tries to do exactly that. Trade is on the table in plain words. Choose A. Short-term cash only, fast sign-ups, quick optics, fragile loyalty. Choose B. Payroll plus co-ops, slower paperwork but shared tools, pooled seed, and stakes in next season's crop. Cheap labor looks efficient until the bus leaves town. Ownership keeps the bus parked. If people can earn near home, they usually do. If they can plan 2 seasons ahead, they usually will. The before-after is simple enough to measure without a spreadsheet. Before, a teacher takes attendance and watches families disappear by mid-term. After, the same classroom fills because parents took patrol shifts and nursery work instead of a one-way ticket. There's risk baked into the social side, too. Patrol fatigue leads to fence gaps. One bad payout cycle can drain trust. A single diseased batch of seedlings sets a block back months. Managers answer with rotation schedules, transparent ledgers at the clinic or market, third-party audits during release windows. Control here isn't a slogan, it's a habit you can check on a wall. Quietly, that matters more than any headline about rabbits. If you're watching from a drought-hit county in the US, the shape is familiar. A public works job that keeps people rooted. A school that stops bleeding students when parents find local shifts. A church hall where the notice board lists who's on the water team this week. Without telling anyone to change their mind, a paycheck changes their week, and a changed week changes their map. A dusk wind moves across the nursery shadecloth. Tags flutter on rows of saplings. The reservoir rim throws a longer shadow than it did last month. The camera follows that shadow to the fence line, where the first real resistance will meet the plan. Not in speeches, but in the pushback waiting beyond the perimeter. The first hit doesn't come from the desert. It comes from the newsroom. The loudest predators today are headlines. Within days, foreign outlets label the plan naive, a stunt, a distraction. Talk radio jokes about bunnies beating the Sahara. Policy desks raise real flags. Population spikes, crop damage, disease like RHDV, and predator pull-ins around burrow zones. NGOs ask for safeguards. Donors ask for metrics, not metaphors. The response from the task team is procedural, not poetic. Phased releases near rains. Density caps per hectare. Relocation once soil targets are met. Vaccination protocols where practical. Predator buffers using shrub belts, brush piles, and selective guarding. Burrow zones sit inside crop-free rings until infiltration and root depth clear thresholds. There's an exit clause on paper. When function returns, numbers taper and the workforce shifts to the next scar. The critique accidentally upgrades the project by treating it like policy, not a headline. Comparisons start flying. Analysts map it next to beaver-built wetlands in North America, prairie dog recoveries on U.S. grasslands, small mammal hydrology hacks in southern Africa. The pattern is familiar. Change water first, vegetation second, livelihoods last. Risk is real on each rung. breach fences, chew crops, uneven predation. The counterweight is management, patrol logs, weekly density counts, crop shield reimbursements, third-party audits during release windows. Choose A, halt the plan until every risk is solved. You win caution and lose a rainy season. Choose run with controls and correct fast. You accept dents on the way, but keep the clock on your side. The dangerous failure mode isn't too many rabbits, it's too little water. People hear pushback in different keys. In a New York control room, a producer lines up a split screen. Cost model on the left, a clip of laughter on the right. In a Sahel village, an elder hears that laughter on a battery radio, then watches two boys carry saplings to a windbreak. Before, dignity was a story you told your children. After, if wages clear on Friday and the reservoir holds through week 7, dignity looks like a job card and a fence that stayed upright in the last gust. Most Americans, by habit, trust fixes with engines because noise signals control. Most rural households, by survival, trust what keeps the well level from dropping. Both instincts are human. The plan is built to lean on the second while reassuring the first with numbers pinned to a wall. Infiltration percent, bulk density, NDVI bands, well depth, survival rates on seedlings. Officials release the early rubric. Green means a block graduates, yellow means hold and adjust, red means pause and protect crops. The grievance board lists fence repairs that got paid and those under review. A night patrol logs jackal tracks outside a buffer, not inside. The data is unromantic by design. If it works, it becomes boring, like a water bill that keeps arriving, paid on time, month after month. The twist under the noise: the plan wins only if it becomes ordinary. No one pretends the laughter disappears. It just gets quieter when rain hits the first tunnels and doesn't skate off like glass. A storm line builds on the horizon. Dust lifts, low and brown, moving like a wall. Cameras tilt from charts to sky, then down to the hard pan, where the next judgment will come from the ground, not the studio. Maps lie in slow motion. The Sahel's boundary isn't a line, it's a tide. Each dry season, the front advances. Regional bulletins track the same pattern. Below average rains, topsoil loss, wells dipping, families shifting toward towns. Policy desks tie Burkina Faso's plan to a larger contest. The Great Green Wall corridors, watershed projects from Senegal to Sudan, pastoral routes threading Niger, Mali, Chad, and Mauritania. If wells hold in one district, pressure eases down the road. If they fail, buses fill again. The regional calculus is blunt. Water changes migration more than speeches do. Officials frame scenarios like a scoreboard. If Burkina Faso stabilizes 100,000 hectares, it buys time. Fewer push factors, steadier classroom roles, less strain on border markets. Neighboring enviro ministries watch the indicators: infiltration gains, NDVI bands, well depth through week 7. Choose A, copy early, adapt the protocol to local soils and predators. You risk missteps, but compound benefits sooner. Choose B, wait for multi-season proof. You avoid embarrassment, but lose another rain cycle. In drought economics, the cost of waiting is paid in people, not press releases. On the ground, the story reads in habits. Before, transhumance herds crowd a single water point. Traders argue over the last jerry can. Parents weigh one more planting season against a ticket north. After, if the curve bends, patrol vests on the fence line, saplings catching wind behind brush, a basin that still reflects sky in week 8. A teacher counts faces. Last term the rows were thin. Now the benches fill. A herder drops a bucket on a rope. It hits water sooner than it did in June. Stability here is measured in rope, not rhetoric. And if most Americans lean toward fixes they can see and hear, rural households across the belt lean toward one proof only. Did the well hold? Analysts point to precedent beats, not poetry. Wetland assists in the U.S. where beavers rebuilt storage for free. Prairie dog towns altering grassland hydrology. Southern Africa's small burrowers punching micro-wells that cradle seedlings. Across continents, the order repeats. Change water first, vegetation second, livelihoods last. Skeptics counter with hard questions. Crop shielding, disease protocols, predator draw. The response is procedural. Phased density, relocation once soils graduate, vaccination where feasible, crop-free rings until thresholds are met. Audits during release windows. The failure modes are logged on paper so they don't live as rumor. People always hear the same argument in different rooms. A producer in Atlanta stacks a segment. Cost curves versus bunnies in the desert. A district chief in Tillaberi studies a contour map and asks whether a reservoir berm belongs here or 200 meters downwind. If humans can anchor a payday near home, most will. If they can predict 2 seasons, they usually stay. The twist under the headline is social, not zoological. Payroll plus water equals gravity. Communities stop drifting when there's weight to hold them. Trade remains explicit. Choose speed. More fences to fix, more patrols, a louder complaints board, but you keep the clock. Choose caution. Fewer dents, cleaner optics, but the front moves while you workshop language. No choice is free. Both are public by design. A laminated chart goes up in a clinic. Green blocks graduated, yellow under adjustment, red on pause to shield crops. A handwritten note lists fence repairs paid, signatures below it. Dust lifts at the horizon, low and brown, shouldering the light. The camera pulls from the notice board to the field edge. Rows of small trees, a shallow basin, a scatter of fresh mounds. The wind presses through the brush line and keeps going, toward a place where numbers end. And weather decides the next line on the map. Success won't trend. Failure will. Either the wells hold quietly or buses fill again. The closing brief is spare and unforgiving. A 5-year clock, quarterly rubrics, and thresholds that decide whether blocks graduate or stall. The scoreboard isn't a speech. It's numbers on a wall. Infiltration rates, bulk density drops, NDVI bans, seedling survival, groundwater depth after week 8. If rainfall underperforms, the plan shifts to triage. Protect greenbelts, pause releases, double maintenance on reservoirs. If disease hits, vaccination or culling protocols trigger. If predation spikes, buffers thicken and patrol rotation tightens. The wager isn't on rabbits, it's on management beating drift, drought, and delay. Trade remains explicit to the end. Choose speed and you accept more fence repairs, more relocation runs, more complaints. But you keep the calendar on your side. Choose caution and you save on dents. Look tidy on paper, while a missed season erases a year of work. According to most behavior studies, humans stick with what pays back on a timetable they can feel. Americans tend to call a program real only when bills are paid and the tap runs. The design leans into that bias. Wages on Fridays, water on Mondays, metrics posted where anyone can read them. If this plan is visible in 5 years, it failed. Success disappears into routine. People will mark the verdict in small rituals. A farmer drops a bucket and hears it strike water sooner than last June. A teacher counts a row that used to be empty and finds it full. A herder watches saplings bend, not break, in a dust gust and keeps his route. Before, the land asked for departures. After, if it holds, it asks for schedules. Quietly, a question hangs over every district. When do you call it working? After 1 rainy season or 3? A thunderhead lifts over a low, pale horizon. Wind slides across fresh mounds, over a shallow basin, through a line of young trees that now cast a thin shade at noon. The camera settles on the water's skin, still, then rippled, waiting for the next sound to decide what the story becomes. Victory, if it comes, will be invisible. A desert doesn't announce its retreat, it just stops arriving. In the final brief, no one talks about rabbits anymore. Only hectares stabilized, wells that didn't fall, migration curves that flattened. The language shifts from project to maintenance, from deployment to routine. That's how officials know the plan has crossed its own finish line. When it's boring enough to ignore. The data tells its version without ceremony. Rainfall stayed inside its narrow band. Infiltration rates in green-coated blocks beat projections by double digits. Sapling belts survived the first hard season. Reservoir loss to evaporation dropped. What didn't happen is the real headline. No wave of displacement, no new cluster of abandoned fields. For a belt that has lived by loss, the absence itself is the news. For people, the shift is sharper. Before, a rope dropped into a well-scraped bottom. Now it strikes water without echo. Before, parents weighed a school term against the cost of staying. Now they mark the calendar by planting days and patrol shifts. Most Americans might look for a ribbon cutting or a plaque. Here, proof is a child learning to swim in a reservoir that didn't exist 5 years ago. In a place where departure was the default, the choice to stay becomes the measure of change. The trade that opened this story still stands in hindsight. Choose speed. Take more hits, but hold the line early. Choose caution. Look cleaner, but lose a season you can't buy back. In this ledger, both options carried risk. Only one could make the land forget the desert's timetable. If humans can shape habit into infrastructure, they can turn survival into stability. A wind crosses the basin carrying the smell of wet soil. Beyond the fence, the horizon is a pale band under cloud. The camera lingers, not on the numbers, but on the quiet. Because quiet is what the plan was built to leave behind.